So now we come to the final session. I just want to go back for a second to what Ajay said right in the beginning, that his family has for generations been producing food. Speaking for myself, I come from a background where we have been eating food for generations. And since all of us eat food, I think this is a very important thing to. I hope it is good food. I mean, I'm from Bengal and I'm very conscious of the fact that Bengal is not really there in, in the standard of eating and prosperity. However, there was a time in my childhood when they used to say that a filled up belly is a sign of prosperity. And that actually was a sign whether you are getting enough rotis or enough rice to eat. In spite of the famines of the 19th century, the last famine in the 20th century was in 1942, we have now come to a stage where sabka pet kafi had se, it is filled up. Now we have come to a stage in 21st century where the time has come to think whether the food systems are healthy or not. Before I request the panelists to speak, I would just highlight a question that was in my mind, and that is to say that while the belly is full, there is no doubt that junk food and fast food is also having a very good advantage in filling it up in a way that is completely unhealthy. I think the one very important thing is to see how junk food and fast food can be discouraged. It cannot be discouraged merely by taxing those big multinational companies which through marketing fill up our minds that this is the best food. I think the government and civil society needs to think it out how to ensure that fast food and junk food doesn't take us over. Now, the subtitle of this panel is Local Frontline Actors Activating Food Transformation in India. So in a way, it is a call for Aam Janta, for civil society, for the public to see how the food systems and the health can be made more healthy and can be made better for everyone. With this, may I request Sunita to start off by giving us your views, because the CSC has always been propagating how important it is to do everything in such a way that the ecology and the environment remains protected. Sunita.
Thank you, Alok. And it's wonderful to be with you. Again, we've known each other for so long. And thank you, Ajay, for asking me to do this. I'm delighted to be here. The EAT-Lancet report is very important, very interesting report which puts out what is the planetary health, the diet to protect the planet's health and our health. But I believe we need to go much further in a country like India, and I believe we are doing so. And I think that's where we need to talk a little more about the work and the efforts that we are making today, because that should influence global policy, and it's not doing so enough. So the first thing I think is important for us to be clear is that climate change is going to have a major impact on agriculture. We know that. We also know that agriculture per se is a contributor to climate change because of the emissions.
Please.
But what we are finding more and more in a country like India, I always get shouted down. It's part of my charm. But what we are finding more and more in India is this sort of double whammy that Indian farmers are facing today. On one hand, the crisis of agriculture, where the cost of inputs are going up, the price of growing food is going up, and the fact is food inflation is bad news for any government, which means that as soon as the price of food goes up, governments import, and as they import from distorted agricultural markets, it depresses the food prices in our country. Further, the farmers, who in any case don't get the value for their produce because of all the middlemen in between, are further impacted. So that's one huge crisis that we have, and that also comes from the fact and the reality that we need to have affordable food. And keep that in mind, because I will come back to that question, because that's the big challenge for us. I mean, today Donald Trump in China has made a deal so that the Chinese will buy soya. That is what the world is about. It's about soya.
Right.
Because you have one crop, farmers who are so dependent on selling it for feeding livestock, which then becomes the most unsustainable way of growing food, eating food. But for us, the challenge is, and for the world, the challenge is affordable food. The second big challenge is, the fact is that with climate change, we will see more and more risk to the farmers, because you have more extreme weather events, more heat, more cold, which again means that if you have a high input agriculture system, the productive agriculture system of the past, it maximizes the risk of the farmers. It increases that indebtedness because you have invested so much, and then you have a bad crop because of increasing pest or increasing extreme weather events, and that makes it even worse for you. So those two double whammies that we are seeing in our world, and that then added to the fact that there is the livelihood issue, there is the nature issue, and then there is the nutrition issue. The question is, what is being grown and what are we eating? And there it's not just about farmers, it's also about industry. But let's stick to the one question that I think that the EAT-Lancet report needs to focus more upon, and I hope you will do so in the later editions, is the question of, as you're talking about food transformation, to talk also about the challenge of growing affordable food. And that means not just talking about organic. Today, European farmers are up in arms saying that when they are so highly subsidized,
67.
I mean, the kind of subsidy an individual European farmer gets is shameful as far as our farmers are concerned. It's practically equivalent to the total cost of production. Think about Indian farmers, think about the farmers in the poor world. What kind of subsidy do they get? The subsidy that is given to the fertilizer industry, not to the farmers. Indian farmers are not subsidized. And then they have to, here in Europe, when they talk about green farming, their farmers are up in arms saying it'll increase the cost of cultivation, and you have the new Green Deal taken back. So the question, I think, big question for the world today is, when we are talking about agricultural transformation, systemic transformation, which I really love to see this time. I saw for the first time that the EAT-Lancet report talked about the need for agricultural systems to change. When we are talking about agricultural systems to change, the bottom line there is how to make them more affordable. And there is where I believe, and Mr. Ramesh Chand is here, this is where the question really becomes, it's not about natural farming, it's not about organic, it's not about anything else. It's about how do you redefine agriculture, the productivity of agriculture, so that you can actually grow food by investing less. And that's the big challenge of the world. Now, that's where the question of markets come in. That's where the question of value addition comes in. Put more money in the hands of farmers so that they actually benefit a lot more. Cut out the middlemen so that they benefit a lot more. There are many ways. But the ultimate question is, how do you put more money in the hands of farmers? How do you reduce the risk to farmers in an age of climate change? I will switch. I have a lot more to say on this, but I have two wonderful panelists, so I don't want to take up the time on theirs. I want to switch to the other big question, which is our health. Because planetary health is not just about the planet, it's about connecting the dots to our health. Now, one of the big questions that we have in India is the question of meat. And I like the fact, I know that you have taken a more nuanced view of the question of meat this time, but I think the question needs to be further discussed. The fact is, meat is a problem when it comes to climate change. Meat is a problem when it comes to health. But meat is also essential for our farmers. You can't demonetize the Indian cattle or the buffalo by taking away the right of the farmer to grow meat. You can't take away the right of Indians to eat protein as meat. So the question then becomes, in terms of the food and nutrition connection becomes, how do you actually make sure that you have a meat culture which is about how the meat is grown? Is it grown in intensive farming systems which compromise the health of the environment, which overuse water, which use too much antibiotics? Or do you create a meat culture which is based on that individual cow, the fantastic example that Mr. Ramesh Chand gives, which is really something that I think India has to be so proud of, is our system of dairy production, which is a model for the whole world, which is the agro-silvo-pastoral system in which the Indian farmers operate. Now, the final point here is, and this is really where I think the rubber meets the road, and I think we are soft pedaling it, is what do we say to industry which produces ultra-processed food and which creates addiction because of that food? It's not good enough to have weak recommendations about taxing that food. We need three things clearly put on the table. One, we need to make sure that that ultra-processed food, we know what needs not to be sold. And there needs to be a clear question about what is not sold. The second is we need to make sure that the front of packaging makes it very clear that when you drink a bottle of Coca-Cola, you're consuming a whole day and a half's quota of your sugar. That message has to be clear. It has to be the tobacco message. You can't make these polite messages, as unfortunately right now the multinational companies, the Indian companies are lobbying with the Indian government, and thankfully the Indian government has not listened to them, is to say, let's have a health, nutrient-based front of the pack system in which literally you could take a packet of Maggi noodles, which has all the salt for 2 days, or at least a full day's quota of a child, and you could add 4 peas in it, and I'm not joking about this, add 4 mutter into it, and those 4 peas would mean, under this convoluted rating system, would make that Maggi noodles good for children to eat. And I'm not kidding about this. So we need to make sure that the governments don't abdicate their role. It's not good enough to say consumers should not consume this food. It's very important that governments do not abdicate their role to be strong enforcers to make sure you and our health is protected. Government's already doing what it can through midday meal schemes, through home-cooked food. The incredible examples in India where millets are being sold, procured for midday meals, home-cooked, all that is happening. But we need to make sure that a country like India, we don't go through the bad food crisis that the rest of the world has gone through. We eat good food today. We eat home-cooked food today. We eat a balanced diet today. We need to make sure we don't go bad and then learn how to cycle. Sorry.
Okay, thanks, Sunita. Thank you. In one way, the bottom line of a good food health policy is the economics of it. On that, we would hear Dr. Dipa Sinha to tell us about it. But before that, let's ask Dr. Reddy about his views on public health to be done in such a way that the food consumption pattern changes for the better.
Let me take off where Sunita left. Quite often, when governments have to exercise their rational and constitutional authority to provide protection to people from unhealthy products, whether it's tobacco or ultra-processed foods or other unhealthy products, the government often is fairly less willing to act with the amount of firmness that's required. We know from tobacco, globally, and partly even in India, that tobacco is more addictive to governments than to people. And that happens even with ultra-processed foods and many other areas, because the industry says that people have a right to choose. The libertarian viewpoint is put forth that people have a right to choose. But choice is not something that happens in the most rational circumstances. Choice is determined whether it's conscious, based on the right kind of information or incorrect information, or conditioned by aggressive promotion and sponsorship by the industry, or sometimes by peer pressure, sometimes by cultural influences. But certainly the industry does play a major role in what I can call our advertised addictions, which result in marketed maladies, which are what we have been talking about in terms of non-communicable diseases rising very rapidly. The third, of course, is it something that is constrained? So apart from being something that's aggressively promoted, is there an economic constraint on part of the consumer to buy healthy products, or healthy products available easily in the market, and if so, are they affordable? So you have to actually look at public policy which actually provides the right kind of information, discourages the wrong kind of information, and provides nutrition and health literacy to all people in the most easily understandable manner and culturally compatible manner. Second, it has to definitely ensure that there are appropriate and adequate restrictions placed on industries' marketing methods which are aggressively promoting unhealthy products. That is something absolutely important, as Sunita said. The third, of course, is the question of the economic constraint. One has to make sure that the healthy products are more easily available and affordable, and that unhealthy products are far less affordable through whatever taxation policies are employed, but also through providing the right kind of subsidies for healthy products to be available and promoted. So this is the area of public policy that has to come in very strongly. Now, since I've raised the issue of tobacco, as some considerable personal risk, may I ask, why is it that worldwide we are having 3.5 million hectares of arable land devoted to tobacco cultivation, which is extremely harmful to health, environmentally damaging because it is water intensive, pesticide intensive, and in many other ways is harmful in terms of the amount of wood consumed for tobacco curing, as well as packaging of tobacco products. In India too, we have about 1.5 million acres of tobacco which are being utilized rather than for nutrient crops. Now, I know that it's important to protect the right of farmers and workers engaged in the tobacco industry and farming, but there has to be political will to pursue that path. In the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, Article 19 actually sets aside a recommendation that all countries must progressively shift people engaged in tobacco, agriculture, and farming and production to economically viable alternatives. Now, unless we demonstrate the will to pursue that path, it's not going to happen on its own. So these are some of the things that we'll have to look at, even when we're looking at other agricultural policies. Now, from the point of view of the report itself and because the topic says actually what can civil society do. I'm putting on the hat not just of a civil society advocate, but also a person engaged in public health, and therefore where science communication, which is responsible science communication, is the duty of public health institutions to be directed at policymakers, at public, and co-professionals. Now there, I believe the report is fairly strong, but we have to communicate that in a fairly dejargonized manner, in a culturally appropriate manner as well. But even in terms of science, there have been questions raised in the past and will continue to be raised even about this particular report as to whether there is strong enough science behind this particular report. It's been said there are entirely correlations, not actually demonstration of causality. They say that we have not demonstrated very clear-cut pathways of how consumption of certain foods is likely to be helpful or not helpful. But now there have been a number of studies globally which have been done which shows the impact on actual events, cardiovascular disease, cancer, even neurological events and so on. And I'm happy to say that it's not just the Mediterranean diet. Some of my former colleagues, I'm formerly from AIMS, some of my colleagues in AIMS are currently conducting an Indo-Mediterranean diet, a multicentric diet across India, in order to look at how Indian diets adapted regionally can actually make a considerable amount of difference. And secondly, we must also recognize, and that's unfortunately something that the report has not really talked about, but that's new science that's emerging. The food we eat is not entirely only for ourselves. The food we eat is for the trillions of bacteria that reside in our gut microbiome. And now we know that fiber-rich foods are things that can actually be consumed, which we cannot consume and digest. They are consumed by the bacteria that reside in the gut. They help us produce the vitamins from that. They help our immunity, and they help us fight the bad bacteria, the bad microbes. But most importantly, now we have a clue as to which foods are likely to be helpful or not to our health. There are certain types of foods which are very helpful if taken, particularly the fruits and vegetables, fiber-rich foods. They produce more short-chain fatty acids, which are good for health. A bad microbiome, which is because of a poor diet, produces what's called TMAO, that is trimethyl amino oxide, which is harmful to the blood vessels, harmful to the brain, and therefore likely to result in multiple diseases. Now we have biochemical markers by which we can say this kind of composite diet is likely to be helpful for a microbiome, which then translates into healthy chemicals, which then translates into protection of blood vessels or harm to blood vessels. We can actually trace the chain. The reason I'm bringing out the microbiome and all these things is, now if you look at the highest selling drug worldwide, it is the anti-obesity drug, GLP-1 agonist. Economist has just published a report that in India, the product Monzaro, which is being supplied by Eli Lilly, which is an imported product now, is already reached number 2 spot in terms of Indian sales. Now, this is at $180 per month of drug utilization. It's already reached the number 1 spot in India. Now, if you actually look at what's happening, GLP-1 is not a synthetically manufactured drug in an industry. It is a natural hormone prepared in the cells of our small intestine. It's always there. It's part of our body. And what can we do to actually increase the GLP-1 production by ourselves? Naturally, our diet makes a difference. GLP-1 production and release are promoted by apples, eggs, nuts, seeds, healthy edible oils like olive oil. Of course, we have other healthy edible oils, and fermented foods. Now, what we are really talking about is the healthy composite diet, which others might call Mediterranean diet. We can call ourselves an Indian traditional diet. Why not? But the question here is, are we going to be squandering millions of dollars on GLP drugs being produced in India under license, when actually our diet, whether we call it an Ayurvedic traditional diet or some other diet, is something that actually should be able to combat, prevent obesity. So these are the kind of things that we ought to be really talking about and communicating to people, so that it's not, the Lancet Commission report is not an abstract entity. It is part of our daily lived reality. It's part of our tradition. It's a part that can easily be understood by people, but now we have strong science to prove it. And that's the kind of communication we need to do it. But for this, we need, I believe, not only people communicating to people, policymakers, public, co-professionals, but also make sure that the coalitions built up. We cannot do it alone. And whether we work with Farmers Association, whether we work with Consumers Association, or we work with other associations, we need to build coalitions. And without that, we are not going to be able to make the transformation. Finally, it's also important that we demonstrate that the government can actually do it not just at a major national scale all at once, but the government not only to the public distribution system, it has a large number of government-funded institutions where diet is provided. The armed forces, the paramilitary forces, the police forces in states, a number of public sector units which are supplying food in their canteens to their people, all subsidized or directly provided free of cost. We should start introducing healthy composite mixed diets there and demonstrate that these are both palatable and good for health, and demonstrate. There's no reason why public money should be squandered in providing unhealthy foods. So these are the kind of changes that we should be able to do if we all unite together.
Right, sir. Thank you very much, sir. I think what seems to be the truth is that to have good, healthy food systems, we need not only public awareness, we need policy awareness. We might even need it in the school curriculum via the new education policy, but we got to do it in a very big way.
But if I may, I'm sorry, but give me 1 minute. Just, something that Srinath has said, it sort of got something. It's not just about awareness. It's also about rethinking what do we mean by good food. What do we mean by good diets? What do we mean by agricultural systems for the future? And I think that's really where the rethinking has to be pushed in, because otherwise it's really business as usual, and at most you'll have a little bit of organic food, which will become the delight of elite. It's like electric cars today. Everybody who has 5 SUVs also has 1 electric car, okay? And some people eat organic food as, I'm green, I eat organic food. Organic has to be the way everybody eats. And I think that's really, to me, and what Srinath, you talked about the gut and the biome. One of the biggest learnings today, and one of the most fascinating new learnings today, is really about soil health. It's not just gut health, but it's about soil health. And it's about microbes in the soil. And about saying that really, if you want to have productivity redefined in the new agricultural world, then you have to invest not just on the crop above, but on the soil below. And that's where the connection biodiversity comes in. That's where the connection comes in to say, the more you grow different kinds of crops, you will add to the different bacteria and fungi in the soil, and the more you will build the soil health. So I think that whole learning, the new learning that that's really the gut in the soil becomes absolutely critical and it's the biodiversity connection. And finally the question becomes, how do you make sure that we put this biodiversity on people's plates so that it's not in the wild, but it's actually on our plate? Sorry, Dipa, I really should not have interrupted what you need to say.
Just a brief comment. I don't want to make this a jugalbandi, but in terms of soil health, it's absolutely important. The mycorrhizae, the fungi that are there, actually draw nutrients and water from the soil and feed the plant roots. And therefore, the entire soil microbiome becomes a very important element as well in determining human and plant health, which translates to human and animal health. So I think all of these composites will have to be looked at, but fundamentally, I think we'll have to look at how our agricultural policies are steered with intent and a fair amount of determination towards promoting and protecting human health.
Thank you, sir. Actually, the way our economy is set up, whether there is crony capitalism or fair capitalism, whatever it is the economics of the good food system that has to be looked into. But ultimately, as long as we have capitalism of any kind, the profit motive, if not regulated, will take us to all kinds of unfortunate channel. So I would request Dipa to tell us about that.
Thank you, sir. You said what I wanted to say, but I'll sort of repeat it in my way, and sorry to break the jugalbandi. And congratulations to the commissioners and for the great report, although I've not read it all, it just got to beginning to read it, but had the good fortune to go over your presentations. What I'll try to do is, of course, I mean, we are not really talking local here, but as somebody who works on these issues, both as an economist, but also with civil society organizations in advocating for the right to food for all, trying to look at how do we go ahead now that you have this global EAT-Lancet report, how can that be used as an entry point to take forward what we have been fighting for. So the first thing I thought, which was quite appealing for me in this time's report, is how justice is quite centrally placed as one of the objectives, and I think that really helps answer a lot of critique of the previous EAT-Lancet report and the questions that came without going into the details of it. And I think when we look at whether it be planetary boundaries or just healthy diets for all, the issue of inequality and the issue of access to healthy food is so closely linked to various kinds of inequality. And I think the report, from the little I've seen, does address the kind of a global inter-country kind of inequality, but for us in India also equally important would be to look at the inequalities within, which very closely would align to the kind of policy recommendations we are making or what we are taking out from this report. It really, the message would be very different if you're looking at it from the point of view of an upper caste, rich, urban person vis-a-vis, say, an Adivasi living in Bastar woman who has young children. It could go either way. You could take the same report and come up and say that this report is saying completely opposite things. And so therefore, I think it's very important to take this principle of justice that is weaved into the report when we are even interpreting the findings and the recommendations of the report, that we do it from the point of view of the most marginalized, the small farmer, the Adivasi woman, and I think that still makes a big difference. And because it's written in this very scientific, neutral language, everybody will take it the way they want to. And so then we ask the questions of not just what is affecting the earth, but like the others also said, who is it affecting in what way? And therefore, what are the recommendations we can come up, For, just to give an example, you could from the same report come up with a policy recommendation, like we have saying that, obesity, overweight, and junk food is the biggest problem, so reduce the amount of oil in the midday meal, or don't allow eggs in school meals. That is probably not a recommendation for children who are eating in government schools. It is an issue. So this whole question of how do we nuance the report, I think is quite important. Linked to that is also this issue of then emphasizing dietary diversity. I didn't hear very much of that in the presentation, but just going back to simple, what are we saying? That you need diverse diets in some sort of balance. And I think that messaging of how this is done also becomes very important, because there is a tendency, and this has a lot to do also again with the market and commercial interests that we are talking about, to demonize certain kinds of foods. So we are definitely not, so the report is not saying this, but we do see then that this is how the media and others take it forward. For instance, then all rice and wheat becomes bad. And then all rice and wheat farmers become bad farmers who are destroying the environment. Everybody who eats rice and wheat are just wanting to become fat. That's not what we are saying. So how do we message this whole issue, and how do we bring in the issue of dietary diversity, which in the Indian context we know is a serious concern and has been for a very long time. We did hear that we don't have dietary data, and that's a big problem. But what little we have, even from the consumption expenditure surveys, quite clearly show that we still have quite a carb-heavy diet. And again, that inequality is very much in it. It is not that the bottommost decile is eating only cereals almost. Over 60% of the protein for the bottom deciles is coming from cereals. Whereas as you go up the deciles from the HCS data, you see that the protein composition is changing. Not only that the richer groups are eating more protein, but the protein is coming more from pulses, legumes, dairy, meat, and so on. So this, how, again, given this context, how do we bring in dietary diversity as a policy issue? And what would that mean? If the policy is to increase dietary diversity for everybody, it's obviously not the same policy for everybody. You on the one side have the whole issue of making all these foods accessible and affordable, and the other end also making all these bad foods inaccessible and unaffordable. And both are equally important in my opinion, and both currently are something that's affecting both the rich and the poor alike. But the rich have their own private solutions. So as you do awareness, people might say, okay, now we eat ragi biscuits, which are also junk. But you're trying to make your own kind of choices. But for the poor, what does that awareness mean? When a banana is more expensive than a packet of Maggi noodles or Parle-G, those tiger biscuit packets, which you see. So without having policy both to restrict the sale, advertising, and availability of the junk foods, along with making what we are saying, local, traditional foods more affordable, how do we, that's another sort of conflict. One other thing I was quite glad to see in your presentation and the report is the emphasis also on the social protection measures, that along with awareness, access to food, the kind of agriculture and so on, that there is an emphasis on the right to decent work, and that has been linked not just to whatever needs to happen in the economy, but the report is talking about, for example, public employment programs and increasing wages and so on. And at the same time looking at, again in the context of India, schemes like the school meals and Anganwadi to be vehicles through which these dietary recommendations could be kind of taken forward. For us in India, I think while we take the positive that we have these very good systems in place, we really do have schemes for all these target groups that we can think of. We have the Narega, we have the PDS, we have the Anganwadi, we have the midday meal. It's also a concern